So thank you, Susan, and good morning, everyone. I am so glad to be here with all of you today to talk a little bit about ITIL and high velocity IT. I suspect that many of you already know that ITIL 4, the latest and greatest edition of ITIL, has been around since early 2019. Still a best practice in service management as a framework, ITIL 4 has actually evolved to address a lot of the needs of the ever-changing business and technology landscapes in order to deliver value. So today, digital technology is growing increasingly more important in the modern business world. And I would say that it is having an unprecedented economic, social, and political impact. Moreover, it's harder and harder for those of us who are, IT digital practitioners to design, develop, run, and support the many systems and services that fulfill this demand. So in the ITIL 4 framework, high velocity IT gives us a way to focus on digital products and services, including digital customer experiences. So for today's session, I want to start with just a little bit of a review from one of my previous webinars. So if you attended one of my previous webinars, specifically it was the ABCs of ITIL 4, this will be familiar to you. But if you didn't actually attend, this is going to give you some context for the rest of today's session. But then what we're going to do is we're going to dive right into the heart of the presentation. We're going to talk about high velocity IT in broad strokes, after which we'll dig a little bit deeper into the details by talking about digital technology. And we're actually going to break that out into both information technology, or IT, and operational technology, or OT. But then we're going to talk about digital organizations and digital transformation. I also want to share with you what the objectives and characteristics of high velocity IT are, and then we'll conclude with 8 different ways that you can adopt ITIL 4 in order to enable high velocity IT in your organization. And I hope that all of you are as excited as I am. But before we get started with any of this content, I do want to just take a moment to talk about ITIL 4 at a very high level. ITIL 4 has been around for over 30 years, and it has truly led the way for guidance in IT service management. Well, ITIL 4, which is the latest generation of ITSM best practices, has really brought that guidance up to date. ITIL 4 is reshaping practices in the wider context of things like customer experience, value streams, and digital transformation, which is going to be a big part of today's discussion. ITIL 4 is also embracing new ways of working, things like lean and agile and DevOps. ITIL 4 provides guidance to address new service management challenges and also to use the potential of modern technology. So really, in the end, ITIL 4 represents a flexible, coordinated, and integrated system for effective governance and management of IT services. So that is the introduction here. Now that that's out of the way, why don't we dig into the details of today's session? And the first part of today's session, I want to talk about high velocity IT, but in broad strokes, very, very broad strokes. In fact, why don't we take this expression and break it down into individual terms? I want to start with the word velocity, because a lot of people believe that velocity is the same thing as speed. So is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about doing IT fast? Is that really what this presentation is about? Not exactly, right? Velocity and speed are related, but they're different. Velocity is speed plus direction. Okay, so fantastic. What does that mean, right? How does that really help us when we talk about high velocity IT? Well, high velocity IT is not just about going fast, right? It's about going fast in the right direction. So listen, we can move really fast in IT. Really, really fast. But if we're going to do the right things, right? In other words, if we want to go in the right direction, that's where high velocity IT can help us, right? If we are not doing the right thing, right? If we're not going in the right direction, going fast actually does more harm than good, right? So this is where ITIL can really step in to help us. In the ITIL 4 framework, high velocity IT is actually defined as the application of digital technology for significant business enablement, where maybe time to market, time to customer, or time to change, and also speed in general are crucial. But high velocity is not restricted to just fast development. It is required throughout the entire service value chain, from innovation all the way through to development and operations onto the actual realization of value. And just like some organizations are more digital than others, the velocity in some organizations is going to be higher than in others. However, an organization with a higher velocity doesn't necessarily mean that it's a better organization, right? The velocity at which an organization should operate really depends on the nature of that organization. And in many cases, a lower velocity may be more beneficial. Also, it isn't always necessary or even recommended that the whole of your organization's IT should be high velocity. For example, if you have a very dynamic customer-facing system, that typically can be managed in a high-velocity IT way. However, a lot of the back office legacy systems are handled better in a more traditional way. You see, high velocity doesn't come at the expense of your utility and warranty of any of your solutions, and high velocity equates with high performance in general. But increasing velocity in an organization will always involve some cost and some risk, particularly if there's a steep change, right? This is a big change rather than just a gradual improvement. And there may be situations where risks are consciously going to be taken in order to gain or maybe just retain the competitive advantage that your company has. Further risks are often unconsciously taken due to lack of understanding of the context and the dilution of warnings before any information has reached decision-making levels. Also, risks may need to be taken when decision makers are influenced by unbalanced incentives or unbalanced targets in their company. For example, when decisions are made which are more likely to help meet short-term targets rather than more sustainable types of targets. So, as you remember, right, scientifically speaking, velocity is speed plus direction, right? So there is a directional component to velocity. In high velocity IT, this is interpreted as doing the right thing. In other words, not only should the requirements of the high velocity approach be fulfilled, but the right decisions need to be made regarding things like investment and sustainability. But please, please, please don't get me wrong, right? High velocity IT provides many organizations with higher degrees of digital enablement, but it isn't always going to be a prudent investment. In some organizations, it just doesn't make sense to undertake such a transformation because they may have other higher priority types of issues to deal with. And others may choose not to try to increase velocity because they think there's a lot of cultural change in doing so, and that might be too difficult to achieve, or it might be unlikely to generate an acceptable return on investment. So this is really where I want to start, right? We have this basic definition and this basic understanding of high velocity IT in very broad strokes, but what does that comprise, right? What is all of this made up of? And I want to continue our discussion by specifically addressing digital technology.